When the international community gathers to define the baseline for human development, they rely on frameworks like Agenda 2030. At the core of that agenda is Sustainable Development Goal 4, Quality Education for All. These global developmental frameworks operate on a hidden assumption. They take for granted that a state has basic stability, continuous funding pipelines, and secure physical infrastructure to actually build upon. Apply that standard to the Palestinian territories. You have a rapidly growing population, expanding at 2.4% annually, with a massive youth demographic leaning heavily on the local educational apparatus. Operating under extreme geopolitical and financial constraints, you would expect severe systemic failure. Yet the Palestinian system currently maintains a 99.7% enrollment rate in basic education. That near-perfect metric is deceptive. Getting students into classrooms is a quantitative victory, but the structure holding them there constantly buckles under severe external pressure. Hitting standard developmental benchmarks on paper loses its value if the underlying physical and economic system remains uniquely vulnerable to sudden catastrophic collapse. To manage this intense friction between high enrollment and high volatility, the Palestinian Ministry of Education completely overhauled its approach in the 2025 to 2027 strategic plan. They codified a specific operational philosophy, resistant education. In this environment, schooling cannot operate merely as a public service. It has to serve a mandatory dual function. The first function aligns with standard economic development. You see it in active instruction like this, focusing on STEM methodology to prepare students for a modern labor market and build a knowledge economy. The second function is entirely unique to the region. Education acts as an existential defense mechanism. It is deliberately utilized to preserve national identity and resist systemic erasure. You see this reality in the physical environment. These institutions function deep inside marginalized and highly managed zones, relying heavily on international scaffolding like the UNRWA network just to keep the gates open. Because the threat of infrastructural damage is constant, the entire educational apparatus is forced to operate in a state of permanent crisis management. In this geography, the educational apparatus serves a dual purpose, building human capital while functioning as the primary mechanism for geopolitical and societal survival. To understand how the 2025 strategy actually works, we need to map the internal mechanics and the external pressures acting on the Palestinian system. We start with a structural assessment. Looking at this SWOT matrix, the internal capabilities are clear. The system boasts that 99.7% enrollment rate and operates under a well-defined national vision for sustainable development. But look at the internal flaws on the other side. You have severe classroom overcrowding. The financial structure is fragile, with salaries consuming up to 95% of the budget. That leaves almost nothing for research, development, or infrastructure. The direct consequence of starving the development budget is a sharp drop in quality. We see this in critically low student performance in international benchmark assessments like TIMSS and PISA. Moving to external factors, the system relies on specific lifelines to stay afloat: rapid digital transformation and sustained international aid. Those lifelines are actively countered by severe external threats. The ongoing occupation, routine attacks on physical infrastructure, and highly volatile foreign aid create an environment of constant disruption. And that baseline population growth of 2.4% acts as a multiplier, continuously compounding the burden of every single external threat on the board. Institutional partnerships with global entities like UNESCO provide the necessary structural scaffolding that the local government simply cannot afford to build alone. The diagnostic data proves a clear point. The system solved the quantity problem years ago, but the crushing weight of external shocks is dragging down the quality metric. That structural failure demands a radical shift in strategy. The ministry's response is a hard pivot away from merely providing access toward aggressively engineering quality and resilience across 4 distinct pillars. The architectural foundation relies on Pillar 1, ensuring safe enrollment, and Pillar 4, dedicated to the recovery and rebuilding of schools, particularly in Gaza. These are not standard educational goals. They are baseline necessities for functioning in a complex zone. Pillar 2 tackles quality enhancement. Here, the system adopts constructivist pedagogical theory. They are deliberately stripping away rote memorization in favor of active, student-led problem solving. Integrating STEM and modern digital skills is a calculated tactic. The objective is to build a knowledge-based economy that relies on intellectual output, something that can bypass physical borders and blockades. To address the immediate economic reality, the ministry relies on human capital theory, driving the most urgent pivot in the strategy, the aggressive expansion of vocational training. The ministry treats vocational training as a targeted economic weapon designed to bypass labor market mismatches and reduce systemic youth unemployment. Pillar 3 focuses on governance. The ministry is pushing for heavily digitized educational management and the diversification of funding sources to reduce that massive reliance on state budgets. This digital governance goes beyond standard administrative modernization. By digitizing records and management, the system ensures it can operate remotely and survive physical decapitation during an acute crisis. These 4 pillars represent a structural transition. The ministry is moving from simply managing an ongoing crisis to actively engineering a shock-proof workforce. We have to ask how this crisis-optimized strategy compares to the standard developmental models deployed by neighboring, structurally stable states. Let's evaluate the core objectives of Palestine's 2025 plan by benchmarking it directly against Egypt's Vision 2030 and Kuwait's Vision 2035. Kuwait's strategy is optimized for high-end human development. That approach is entirely dependent on extreme state wealth and absolute internal stability. Egypt's Education 2.0 approach focuses heavily on digital transformation to manage massive classroom density, but it operates firmly within a sovereign, physically secure environment. Isolate Palestine's strategy, and a stark differentiator emerges. Their baseline, everyday operational metrics rely on crisis recovery and resilience under emergency. You also see a massive difference in economic urgency. For Kuwait, vocational education is a supplementary program tied to an economy of abundance. For Palestine, it is an immediate, critical economic lifeline. The physical staging of education, the desks, the whiteboards, might look identical across borders, but the operational stakes dictating who sits in those chairs are entirely different. Regional models assume a foundational level of stability exists to build prosperity. The Palestinian model has to continuously rebuild that stability just to survive. This brings us back to the initial paradox. How can a state accurately ally with the UN's goal for quality education when it lacks the foundational piece required by the UN framework? Look at the global standard directly against the Palestinian adaptation. The global mandate calls for sustainability. In the Palestinian context, it translates into continuous operation under emergency. The normative goal of quality is forcefully redefined. Here, quality means immediate employability and survival mechanics. The Palestinian Ministry of Education hasn't failed to adopt the Sustainable Development Goals. They have heavily mutated them to ensure they actually function within a hostile geopolitical reality. Intense pressure forces adaptation. They took a standard framework and mechanically pressed it into a highly specialized, hardened tool. Standard, theoretical developmental policies must be bent and localized. If they aren't, they simply break under extreme constraints. Securing a 99.7% baseline enrollment rate is only the first step. The true measure of the system's success over the next 3 years will be the actual execution of its STEM and vocational pivot. The concept of resistant education proves a brutal economic reality. When physical infrastructure can be erased overnight, human capital becomes the only indestructible asset a society has left. The Palestinian model offers a specific lesson for global policy. Sustainable development in a crisis zone is the act of engineering the capacity to withstand today's collapse.